Welcome to this afternoon's session of the Energy Security and Net Zero Select Committee, and we are looking at the Warm Homes Plan. And our first panel have joined us, and I will ask you to introduce yourselves, starting on this side, please.
I'm Brenda Boardman from the Environmental Change Institute at the University of Oxford.
Hello, I'm Peter Smith. I'm Director of Policy and Advocacy at the charity National Energy Action.
Dion Tickner from the National Order People's Charity, Age UK.
Thank you very much. You are all very welcome. We look forward to hearing your evidence, and I'll start the questioning. Do you think that the sector has the capacity to deliver the government's plan as set out, whether that be through its workforce or through access to the materials and the supply chain that's necessary? Who would like to go first?
I'll go first. I think the sector has the capacity. The question is whether the government defines the policies clearly enough for them to implement it. And by the way, Chair, I call it the We Hope plan as opposed to the Warm Homes, because it's full of good things, but there's an awful lot of fingers crossed and impossible policies to be delivered. One of the reasons that the 1 million might be achieved is partly because the government's policy definition, the LILI, actually defines out a lot of the fuel poor, because if you are in an EPC, an Energy Performance Certificate, band A, B or C, you cannot be in fuel poverty. So because you're meant to be in an adequately energy efficient home. And that of course doesn't work entirely well if you're on an extremely low income. And there is no debate about alternative definitions and alternative numbers in the Warm Homes Plan, whereas the fuel poverty strategy says it could be up to 9 million homes with a different definition in fuel poverty.
Your concern is that the plan as set won't lift some of the people who most need help out of fuel poverty?
Because they're not considered by the government to be in fuel poverty.
Right. Is that a concern shared by Peter and Dion?
Just very briefly, in terms of the supply chain, obviously that supply chain has seen contraction already and is currently experiencing a further contraction. Ironically, we're talking about gearing up the industry to deliver quite an ambitious target when, in fact, jobs are being lost and skills are being abandoned. So that's the context that we're trying to deliver the plan in, and it's vital that that is turned around quite promptly by some early wins in terms of the delivery of that plan and warmer homes. I think in terms of the 1 million target of fuel-poor households, it's absolutely vital that that target is met. There's a statutory target to eradicate fuel poverty or to ensure that those households that live in fuel poverty in England live in a reasonably energy-efficient home by the end of this decade. And there's 3 million or more households in that position. So 1 million is a third of that target. So it's vital that that is met. If I just take one moment more just to explain the government's rationale for how it will meet that 1 million target and hopes to deliver it. A big contribution of that is to be met in the rented sector, both social and private rented sector. Unfortunately, we're still waiting for the regulations for those minimum energy efficiency standards, as I think we'll come on to later. But that's an urgent priority if we are going to see the heavy lifting being done in the rented sector. The other large contribution is in energy bill support as opposed to energy efficiency measures. And we know that that's a more expensive way of delivering assistance to the most vulnerable households. Finally, I'd say that there's a big gap in terms of direct support for owner-occupied, which make a very, very small percentage of that 1 million target, and we're hoping that that can be a real key area of focus in your lines of inquiry to government.
Yes, we will be returning to that last point a little bit later on. You use the phrase early wins. Is this because you think it's how you give confidence to the sector?
Well, I think there's been a long hiatus in terms of publishing the plan. And with that, the government's ability to deliver against that statutory target will also just create those conditions which we all want to see, which are warmer, healthier homes, if we can make sure that there's early confidence about the emerging schemes, but also no hiatus in terms of current support, then we can give that assurance. But the big issue is the abandonment of the energy company obligation, which has been doing the heavy lifting on energy efficiency delivery for several decades.
Okay, Dion?
Back to Brenda's point, I think it's worth saying that I think 1 million is a pretty ambitious target to meet by 2030, but we are, of course, mindful of the fact that there are 2 million additional households under the Lilly metric not covered by this plan. I think the detail we have at the moment, to Peter's point, provides a solid foundation, but there's still more detail required.
Thank you. And Peter, you were talking about changes in the way that, moving some of the policy costs off energy bills. Do you think that measures in the plan will help cut energy bills in the long term?
Well, it's absolutely vital that they do, and we know that energy efficiency can deliver life-changing differences in affordability of energy bills and the comfort in people's homes. We always talk about the average customer when we're talking about things like price caps, talking about £150 drop, £150 increase. But if you're living in an F&G rated home, your energy bill is something like £4,000 a year compared to an average of £1,500, £2,000. So it's hugely important that those energy saving measures are delivered and they're delivered well. And if that's the case, then it can be life-changing for those households.
Do you think how much scope do you think there is for the use of demand flexibility to help with this programme? Do you think it sits alongside the Warm Homes Plan?
Briefly, DNO's district network operators and other agents were previously involved in energy efficiency plans through ESOP, the government's sort of early supplier obligations. There's no reason why DNOs and other agents can't be part of those demand reductions, because it helps them cut the need for network reinforcement. There's obviously some nod towards that in the Warm Homes Plan, but we're a long way from that at the moment, and we're concerned about the hiatus from supplier-led obligation to DNO obligation taking far too long, and not realising the need to meet that statutory target or deliver life-changing improvements sooner rather than later.
And the scope for the use of flexible tariffs or greater use of tariffs, do you think that's going to make a big difference?
It's vital. If we're going to see people adopting more electric technologies, particularly for heating, that there's a greater selection of tariffs, because those that are Economy 7, for example, can be exorbitantly expensive.
Well, Brenda?
Chair, if one of the problems is that we don't particularly have fair pricing at the moment. If you are a household with a night storage heater and you have what's called Economy 7, you're paying 14 pence per kilowatt hour at night. If you happen to be a rather better off household with an electric vehicle and you get Economy 7 tariff at night, it's 7p. So why have we a tariff that gives the better off household 7p per kilowatt hour, whereas the fuel poor, who are often fuel poor, the people with a night storage heater, still have to pay 14p? So, and that's the sort of thing that you can do overnight. It doesn't require capital investment, it just requires somebody to be consistent.
That's very helpful, thank you. And final question from me before I pass on to Claire. Do you think the plan strikes the right balance between incentives and regulation to increase the energy efficiency of our housing stock?
Can I
want to go, Dion?
Yeah, I think what I would say is, it's a pretty comprehensive plan, and taking it back a moment to the point about whether it will lower bills. Each of the policies within the Warm Homes Plan tend to target different areas. Some, like higher energy efficiency standards in the private rented sector, are pretty ambitious, involving the upgrade of 2 million homes, and there are decisions to be made by potentially 2 million landlords there on the kinds of installations that are to be installed and the extent to which that investment might need to be recovered through higher bills. So there's a risk about different outcomes for different cohorts, and I think for us, our concern is not necessarily about whether there's a proper balance between incentives and regulations, but whether the regulations and incentives lead to the outcomes that they're intended to. If you take that example of a private rented sector again, just because of the sheer scale of upgrades that do need to be made. Some landlords are likely to be willing and able to make those, while others may be unable for a lack of information or maybe unwilling to make those changes. One thing we don't currently have in the plan is a clear strategy for enforcement or detail on where local authorities will be adequately resourced in order to proactively enforce against those targets and make sure that the regulations do lead to the outcomes that we want to see.
Okay, so you don't think that the balance is there?
I would say...
or the measure, or that the outcomes are correctly identified?
I think for us, we're more concerned about the outcomes as to whether the plan as a whole has enough with incentives and regulations. There's a significant amount of money and there are really ambitious regulations as well. So really it's about making sure that translates into lifting as many households out of fuel poverty.
What would you change?
For us, it's detail on how regulations, which will do the heavy lifting of this plan, will be properly enforced. We know that many local authorities don't have the capacity to do that proactive enforcement.
Great, thank you. Brenda?
Thank you. What is important to realise, I don't disagree with Dion, but also regulation and incentives are a bit like a seesaw. The more money you give to people, the less you need regulation, and therefore if you want to save money, you give more regulation. And the 15 billion that we've got this time is a huge quantity of money. I'm not sure how often Parliament wants to vote another 15 billion. So we've got to focus quite strongly on the regulations taking over from government funding. And do
you have an additional recommendation, Dion? Sorry to interrupt you. Dion was talking there about enforcement.
What I was going to say was that the government is putting money into developing heat pumps, but it hasn't stated clearly that gas boilers are going to be banned. They were going to be banned by 2030, then they were going to be banned by 2035, and now nobody knows if they're going to be banned or when. And it didn't matter what date it was or is, but it does help the public if they know they've got to plan to get rid of gas in their homes, and they don't know that at the moment. We have the MEES in the privately rented sector, but we don't require landlords to register. So we have a legislation that we can't actually properly enforce because we haven't tied up the bits of legislation behind. There are other examples where I think the government should have said quite a bit more on regulation to set the framework to get the private money flowing so that we're not requiring 15 billion of government money tomorrow.
This was the proposed ban by the Sunak government where he'd given a date.
Sorry, I missed that.
It was the proposed ban, I think it was 2035, wasn't it, by the Sunak government, and that date's no longer there.
It was actually in the Clean Growth Strategy in 2017, but it sort of taken that long to actually do something about it. So, and I think they eventually, the big debate was whether or not it was 2030. Can I just make one point about tenure? I think tenure and mandation really matter, the overlap. So I think in the social rented sector, absolutely right to drive high standards. That's just a continuation of the high standards that social housing has been, that journey it's been on. Private rented sector, we've got to get up to the same level as that social rented sector as soon as possible from the worst performing tenure. Owner occupied, particularly fuel poor households, they're going to need those incentives, and they need full capital grants, and they need a lot of support to make that happen. If you just mandate something to happen, they will be left cold in their homes, and they will be perhaps outside of the law.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Claire.
Thank you. So we've heard the plan offers less money for lifting households out of fuel poverty. And Peter, you mentioned the particular issue of low-income owner-occupied households. So can I start by asking each of you to briefly say whether you think the merged Warm Homes Local Grant and Warm Homes Social Housing Fund schemes from 2027-28 adequately support low-income and fuel poor households?
I would just say we see the value of merging it for the sake of simplicity and the fact it would enable a local area-based approach. The concern for us, and we don't have the answers to this, is whether or not it creates competition in funding between social housing, landlords and individual homeowners. So that's some detail we need to see, but we don't currently have. What would a merged scheme look like, and how would that funding pot be managed between the two different cohorts it's trying to help?
I think there's two things that you need to consider. Is this sort of is it sufficient in scale? So we mentioned the energy company obligation previously providing a notional 1.5 billion a year into energy efficiency. So will that be comparable? No, is the answer. So not at the same level. And how will it be accessed by the poorest household? So if you're in an area where there's a competent local authority or a competent social landlord, brilliant. That should enable them to provide you with support. If you're an owner-occupied household, fuel-poor household in dire straits, but you don't live in a competent area with a competent local authority, you can't access support. And I think we're going to be coming on to some of those issues in a minute. But we think that requires a bespoke policy to be as yet announced by the government, and would welcome informing the committee about what we think that should look like.
Okay. Brenda?
No, I don't want to add. That's all right, thanks.
So if I can move on to the issue of the enforcement of landlord standards. What does the government need to do to make sure that that's going to be consistent, effective?
Well, I mentioned that it would help if we knew who the landlords are. At the moment, as I understand it, it's up to each local authority if they devise a scheme of their own. In Oxford, they've done that. And they charge each landlord I thought something like 30 quid, and that covers the administrative costs. But it's only the good landlords that put themselves forward. How do you find the bad landlords? They're not going to register and then get somebody, holding them to account. So it's absurd that we have legislation that we can't really enforce.
I think it should be said that on the positive side, that if you do provide local authorities with the sort of guidance, clear guidance, training and capacity building, they can be effective in policing housing standards. In Wales, there's the Smart Wales model, which is lifted, I think, half the amount of F&G rated rented homes. So where there's a clear sort of structure in place, clear guidance and training and support, enforcement can be done effectively. But the great concern is it isn't at the moment with the current standards, and we know that there have been, I think, virtually no enforcement against those existing MEES regulations. If that plays forward with millions more properties in scope, it will be a travesty to see what should be a vital support for tenants who are facing desperate straits at the moment, not delivering the outcomes that policymakers like yourselves sort of attest to the policy.
And what do you think we should do about that?
I think you need to do a couple of things. You need to that model in Wales could be emulated either nationally or regionally or locally. You could provide a bespoke agent that could galvanise those local authorities and provide them with the instruction and the data and the support necessary to really lift them up in terms of their enforcement capacity. You could also make sure that the local authorities that are able to receive an income from successful enforcement cases, you can provide that to them upfront as a seed funding and let them draw that down so they can build up that capacity, bring in officers and do that work up front rather than sort of drawing it down on a sort of revenue basis. Final thing I'd say is that you need to name and shame the local authorities that aren't enforcing the law. And I think it's really clear that there hasn't been any national strand of data which is able to show what local authorities are doing in this space or not doing in this space is more accurate. And I think that's unacceptable given the outcomes that we're talking about, in some instances, are life and death.
Dion, did you want to add anything to that?
Just to re-emphasise an earlier point that enforcement ought to really be proactive. I think even with forthcoming renters' rights changes, there's still a perception, especially amongst older renters who tend to have longer tenures, that to speak out about changes which should be done to the homes they're living in, to report that to their local authority might result in reprisals, might result in higher rents or evictions, even if there are additional protections coming in. That's a deeply embedded thought amongst a lot of older people.
And finally, what additional measures are required to reach low-income owner-occupiers currently lacking viable upgrade routes? And I earlier today I was in the MP meeting about the heating oil costs, and also LPG, obviously, and those families. So there will be more households, who at least on a temporary basis, are going to be going into fuel poverty. So, what can we do? What can the government do about that?
Thank you. Sorry, go ahead. You sure? Previously there was the Warm Front programme, which was the most successful either carbon abatement or fuel poverty programme run by the previous Labour government. We'd like to see a return to that type of model, where if you're in the dire straits in fuel poverty and you need assistance for heating or insulation measures or ancillary support, you can receive that through a grant, and if you're eligible, you put your hand up and you get that help, and it's guaranteed that outcome can be achieved. That's particularly vital in encouraging the contribution from the health sector and supporting the most vulnerable groups like children in cold homes, because you as an agency that works on their behalf, say elderly people, can link into that programme with some certainty that those people will be helped. If you don't do that, if the government don't take that route, they can also introduce a full capital grant, a bit like the boiler upgrade scheme for low-income households, that would provide all those types of measures that I've mentioned, but provide 100% funding as opposed to 70%, which precludes the poorest households benefiting from the scheme.
Sorry, Peter, what was the name of the scheme? I didn't catch the name.
The boiler upgrade scheme.
Boiler upgrade.
Which is your 70%, isn't it, contribution towards an air source heat pump. I think the measures have been slightly extended, but the remaining capital contribution is prohibitive for the poorest households that don't have any money.
Brenda, did you have anything?
Yes, can I, as Peter's mentioned health and children, I just wanted to bring to the committee's knowledge that we know the first 2 years of a child's life are incredibly precious, physically and mentally, in the way that they develop. And if they don't have the opportunity to develop during that period, it cannot be recovered. I think it would be wonderful if the government came forward with a policy for owner-occupiers, privately rented or whoever, anyone who's got a baby, a child under 2, and that they get priority in terms of getting insulation and improvements, so that family isn't in a situation of desperately being cold, not having enough food to eat, and so forth, and therefore risking the development of their little child.
Can we second that, if that's okay?
I would just quickly make a point that within the fuel poverty strategy, there was a slight shift from kind of a worse EPC-rated homes towards one which prioritises households in vulnerable circumstances. So that's exactly the kind of thing we would support as well. Obviously, from our perspective as HK, we're more interested in vulnerable older people, but that totally makes sense. On the original question, I would say, in terms of the detail available in the Warm Homes Plan, after the grants that are available through Warm Homes local grants, the next thing available to owner-occupiers tends to be low-cost finance, particularly loans or maybe subscription services. And what we're seeing at HK is that older people are still feeling, the pinch from the cost of living. Our latest data shows 22% of owner-occupiers are financially struggling, so we worry that that kind of option won't necessarily be appetising to them. In terms of loans to actually be attractive, sorry, let me just check my notes. We have seen examples of where loan schemes can work, and we know that loans are going to be a key part of delivering the Warm Homes Plan. So where government is providing backing for loans, it could be possible where they look at examples like in the southwest of England, where one community interest lending organisation works with various local authorities to give low interest loans, and where a consumer is identified as unable to be able to meet the terms of that loan or afford it, they get referred directly into their local authority for an assessment of whether a grant would be more appropriate instead. So it might be the case that where government is looking at backing low interest loans, they work with lenders to see if there are referral pathways into initiatives like Warm Home local grants. I'd also just emphasise Peter's point from before, but grants do seem to generally be a more appealing option for low income households, and I think that's also because after the upfront cost of paying for an installation, there's a huge perception, a huge worry that things might go wrong. Yeah. So not only are you asking people to, stretch already overstretched budgets, but you're asking them to, almost blindly trust that things won't go wrong.
Thank you.
Can I just add one thing? We have to. Loans can be important if you've got equity in the house to underwrite it, and so you repay it when you move out of the house. Loans are very difficult for low-income families to repay if they have got just to try and do it out of their income. Why are they in fuel poverty? Because they don't have enough income to keep adequately warm. If you then start to burden them with repaying a loan, you are not getting them out of fuel poverty.
Peter?
Just briefly, I think it's really vital to fund some measures that aren't included under current grant schemes. So we've lost any support for replacing or repairing gas boilers. I know we're trying to do away with gas, but if you're a vulnerable household with a medical health condition who can't actually physically install a air source heat pump, it seems pretty cruel to not include those measures in national schemes, particularly given it could be life or death or lead to a long extended stay in hospital if those people can't be kept warm. In addition to that, I think the department's quite keen on new kit and new sort of blingy sort of stuff. It's vital not to forget about low-cost energy-saving measures, not just those that you know are attractive for various other reasons.
Thank you very much. Graham, then Polly after that.
Thank you. You actually just touched on some of the questions I wanted to ask around about loan structures, but specifically can I ask Peter and probably Brenda for the first question, what lessons could we learn from the Green Deal and the Green Homes Grant about how to structure loans properly? How do you start going about building consumer confidence in loans at all for some of the reasons that you've just outlined can be problematic, and what are the main barriers to people being cautious of taking a loan over, as you say, obviously a grant? Peter, maybe start with you.
Well, the interest rate was prohibitive for the Green Deal in particular, and it was derided by the fact that you could get a cheaper loan from your bank or whoever. So it's vital that it's competitive with sort of other loans that are out there. If it's 0% interest loan, it's also important to think about how households that have a poor credit history are able to access that, despite the percentage being low. If you've got a poor credit history or unable to access any credit or don't have even a bank account, it's very hard to benefit from those type of financial arrangements. One thing I'd say is make it work in the rented sector, particularly the private rented sector. We think although fuel poor households, low income households should benefit from full grants as a preference, and they'd be much more keener on going for that support. If you're providing support for landlords, they could benefit from those low or zero interest loans as a compliance tool to meet those regulatory standards earlier.
It's the situation at the moment that if you are a builder, you can go into somebody's home and say you're a builder with absolutely no qualifications, no certification, nothing. You can't do that as an electrician. I'm fairly certain you can't do it as a plumber. So we need a system where people who are working in the building industry are accredited properly and their work is audited. And when we don't want them to self-certify that their work is all right. That was one of the things that went wrong with Eco 4. But they should be a requirement that the local authorities building control officer says this work has been done properly. There's no way in many cases the householder knows if they've done it properly until they get damp or mould or something disastrous goes on. And another lesson I think we need to learn, and it would be good if DESNZ listened to this, they do overprescribe. They go into too much detail. One of the things with Eco 4, I mean, there was something like 8 certification bodies who didn't talk to each other. There were 30 forms. Please, DESNZ, somehow or other, keep it simple, make it happen. But and that requires something odd, like DESNZ trusting local authorities, for instance, to monitor what is happening in the homes and make sure it's done properly. But don't go to the detail. I mean, look how long it's taken the Warm Homes Plan to come out. If we wait for some of the policies that are mentioned in that, it'll be 2030.
Just specifically on some of the loan conditions, would you say it's important that the loans have things like security against job loss or other elements built in order to build that confidence up as well?
I think so. It's also vital that they're not tied to the energy meter, which was the other big problem with the Green Deal, and scared a lot of people that if they didn't pay that bill or they didn't make the theoretical savings because they were taking thermal comfort as opposed to financial savings from those energy saving measures, they would be cut off essentially from their energy provider. So it's vital we don't do that. It's also important that we build in other safeguards. You mentioned one very important one, but also if landlords are benefiting from that zero or low interest loan, they don't put the prices up or their rents up for tenants. In Wales, they have to sign a memorandum of understanding not to put up prices for the duration of a loan or a grant, lifetime of the grant measure, and we think that that's a model that should be emulated here.
Peter took the words out of my mouth, really, especially with regards to how this could be well targeted at landlords to enable PRSMEs, and we do believe there should be conditionality associated in terms of how much rent they could potentially add to consumers' bills.
And Dion, for you probably specifically, you mentioned difficulty something with older people being confident in taking loans. How important is political consensus to that there will be continuation? And what would the impact be of some parties this week suggesting that these kind of grants or conditions could be cut in the future?
I think to this whole project, continuity is really important. And if we think about the plan to establish a warm homes agency, one of the biggest roles we feel it will have to play is creating information and awareness for the public at large, because energy retrofit schemes have largely chopped and changed over the past couple of decades to the point that public awareness of them is very low. So political consensus is relevant, but generally speaking, I think it's about how that translates into public awareness of what's available and having some kind of assurance that those schemes might be available for a period of time while people, their financial circumstances might change if the cost of living starts to get a little bit easier. So maybe they're aware of it now, aren't willing to take the loan, but later on they're aware that that scheme exists and find it more palatable.
And Peter, what would your view be on that, and what impact would it have on people's likelihood to access loans or other support if they felt it wasn't going to be there, and what effect would that have on their circumstances down the line when it comes to fuel poverty? And Brenda, possibly if you've got anything to say on that as well.
I think, just thinking of the adverse, I think if you do see the duration of schemes and certainty that they'll continue, like in Scotland, for example, people will invest in those schemes, and what's created is not just momentum in terms of the supply chains or new apprentices being brought on board, which is obviously positive. It's also those other agencies linking into those schemes, which is so vital. So if you're a doctor if you're a doctor, you know about that scheme and it's been around for 10 years, you're much more likely to refer a vulnerable patient towards it, and compare that to a 6-month grant programme or voucher scheme, which is here 1 minute, gone the next. A doctor is not going to spend time explaining that to their patient or thinking that it's going to lead to a positive outcome.
So all of those benefits could be put at risk by announcements from political parties suggesting that perhaps this won't be continuing.
Well, it's devil if you do and devil if you don't, isn't it? We want political parties to come up with creative ideas on energy efficiency and continue to improve schemes, or even change them if they're not working. But what's important is that you invest time and effort to build consensus around the regulatory and legal requirements that are in statute, like the fuel poverty target. And through that mechanism, you can have any type of scheme sitting underneath that, achieving that aspiration, but the schemes might chop and change.
So Ben, you got anything to add to that?
I think it's important that everybody in this country understands the impact of climate change and understands that what we have got to do is phase out fossil fuels, phase out gas, that this isn't a short-term set of issues, this is a very long-term set of issues, and that we've all got to get our homes up to possibly A-rated in due course. And at the moment, I don't think a large percentage of the population has anything like that concept.
Thank you, Chair. Ollie.
Thank you, Chair, and apologies for being a bit late. I'd like to ask about minimum energy efficiency standards. As we know, they've been around, but they were effectively unenforced by local authorities because they didn't have the power, the resources to do so. So how, and I'm particularly interested in them in relation to private rented sector, places like mine, Margate, Broadstairs and Ramsgate, lots of private rented sector. A lot of weather. We're not Scotland, but we do have a lot of weather. And so I'm interested to see how those minimum energy efficiency standards would impact on either on the private rented sector and what incentives for landlords might work. So how do you think those new minimum energy efficiency standards will work? How will that be different from previous ones? And how effective will they be in the first instance?
Thank you. If we don't do anything, they won't, and if we don't do anything different, they won't. I think I alluded to a couple of areas where I think we need to see a keen focus. I think first of all, not just relying on those local authorities to sort of understand the rules and the statute as and when it's presented to us 10 years after we first announced the policy. It would be good to clarify that, make sure that the guidance is clear for local authorities. It wasn't previously at all clear. It was initially tied to the golden rule and other things strange about the Green Deal that we were talking about earlier. And then it changed again. It became a cost cap. And we've got to make sure that the housing responsibilities of enforcement teams, as opposed to training standards, are clear. So sort of understanding those responsibilities and roles in clear guidance is vital. I think the other thing is oversight. I don't think there's any oversight around current enforcement levels of MEES or other housing standards. We seem to have lost those reporting responsibilities with Eric Pickle's sort of cull of everything back in 2012. Haven't got them back. There is a local authority framework, indicator framework consultation out at the moment. Still don't know what it is, about a year after it's sort of been consulted.
There's a risk that we put a new set of standards in, and unless we have a new enforcement regime, it will be as bad as the old one.
Thank you, Polly. Right. Always very, very succinct.
Okay. Sometimes it takes me a bit of time to get there, though.
Can I?
Go on,
Sorry.
Dr. Boardman.
I just wanted to say that, especially with MEES, it's a curious situation where there is an obligation on a landlord, but a cap on expenditure.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that. Go on.
I don't see how those two fit together. So we get a situation where landlords are given exemptions. I'm not saying this is fair, I'm just saying what happens at the moment. So that with the first round, if you'd spent your £3,500 as a landlord and not got your property up to the required standard of an E, I think it was then, you were given an exemption. So therefore there are some households in the first round who may still be in F and Gs, and they're meant now to be with a landlord getting them to a C. So we're not again getting clarity in a policy as a whole, because we're letting people slip through. Sorry, can I just a bit more? At the same time, it's really difficult to expect every landlord to have, say, £10,000 sitting in their back pocket. And I think the whole policy towards the rental situation, we mentioned the problem of not letting rents increase. There is the problem of landlords having sufficient money. There is changes in the way that the taxation of landlords is taking place. So there are some difficult situations there, which may mean that if we're not careful, we will end up with a privately rented sector which disappears or almost disappears.
Yeah, I was interested in that, because what I'm concerned about is that what we have is a set of energy efficiency standards that aren't enforced, a cap which basically gives people a get out and no incentive to do the right thing, which feels like the wrong set of rules.
Non-joined up.
Okay, that's politely put, I think, Dr. Boardman. What might be an effective way of changing it from exemptions to incentives, even if you maintain the cap?
We used to have what was called the landlord...
Energy saving allowance, like LISA.
LISA, the Landlord Energy Saving Allowance, which meant that if you spent money on energy efficiency improvements, your energy saving, you could get an allowance in your tax.
How long ago was this?
It was 15. It was a ban. It was basically a ban at the same time they brought in the minimum energy efficiency standard. So when you were talking about the seesaw earlier, we sort of lurched very much to one side of the seesaw and thought that was sufficient.
So we used to give landlords an allowance without them having a set of standards to apply. Now we've introduced a set of standards for them to apply without them giving them any money in order to be able to do it.
Dead weight
and then
in
we've
the Treasury.
capped it. And then, right, okay. It would be helpful, I think, from your evidence, if we were to be able to summarise it as the minimum energy efficiency standards need to be able to make sure that we've not just got guidelines but also resources for local authorities in order to be able to enforce them. That a 10,000 cost cap might be fine, but what you also need to do is to ensure that you've got some kind of tax break or something that enables enables the landlords to do it. Otherwise, what they're going to do is sell up. Fair?
And it could be a low-interest loan. Now the government is talking about low-interest loans, and that's infinitely cheaper than grants.
Okay, and one more further question before I relinquish my right to speak for a bit. Just for a bit. I'm interested.
Is that a promise?
I'm interested in the EPC metrics. I've been banging on about EPC reform for a long time. Do you think what is the best way of designing those to drive down real bill reduction? Both bill reduction and carbon savings. We know one of the problems at the moment is you put a heat pump in, it doesn't improve your EPC rating.
Well, just briefly on your previous question, I think you need to see a new reporting mechanism as well for local authorities to understand what capacity and resources being channeled towards enforcement teams of housing standards and how much compliance is actually taking place in an area. We don't have that visibility at the moment. You could get that through a new HECA framework, for example, which would be great. For different routes. I think in terms of the metric, HEMS, home energy, whatever is it, home energy methodology, if someone will help me out. It's completely opaque at the moment what that's going to be. There's a consultation. It's taken a long time to review EPCs.
What would you have in it?
I think just a very clear metric. There's talk about these two metrics now being adopted. One's carbon-based and one's energy-saving-based. You could have a tech metric. All of that seems to be overly complicated, and particularly if you're a compliance officer, you just need to know what the EPC is and what it currently is, and do the two match. So just a really clear metric, not over-engineered. I think there's a lot of assumptions that go into EPCs which are very generic, and it's right to look at the sort of sophistication of those and override them. But let's not get too complicated about it, particularly in situ EPCs could be devilishly complicated things to measure, to then report on, and for an enforcement team to have any clue about. I'm
also thinking about, Dion, the people that you stand up for. Okay, the enforcement teams are important, but also if you are buying or renting a home, particularly when you're going to be starting to worry about those kind of things as you get older because of your need to keep warm and comfy, and the complexity of all this new kit, which you don't want to be bothered about. How do we make sure that this system is easy for consumers too?
I think, and this really speaks to your previous question, I should say from the outset we're not close to the technical detail of the EPC reform, so I won't comment too much on that. But one of the things we think needs to happen, and quite quickly alongside getting the MEES regulation up and running, is developing, what landlords will have access to in terms of information, encouraging them to take an approach which puts the tenant at the centre in terms of when they're assessing the kind of fabric condition of the home, the heating suitability of it, and what needs to happen in order to get it up to an EPCC or spend £10,000. So you might look at examples like what they're developing in Scotland right now. I think it's the heating and energy efficiency technical suitability assessment, something with a really horrible acronym, but the point there is it's separate to an EPC assessment done beforehand, not only to consider the condition of a property and what needs to be done, but to consider the logistics and the conditions of the people living within the home, particularly whether there's any vulnerability and what kinds of measures might work in the interest of those tenants. So when it comes round to actually installing measures, it can be done effectively without any potential disruption, and also considering, after the fact, what kind of aftercare there might need to be for the tenants to make sure that they're
sounds like it's additional to EPCs, which concerns me that like we've already talked about when you said that there were 8 different things and 32, 8 different certificates and 32. I was just like, when I'm renting a place, oh, great. At the moment, I go, oh, great, it's EPCC.
I don't think it needs to be anything too rigid or too formal. Realistically, it's just, an idea to do something before you actually invest £10,000 in your property that says, okay...
Would this be the responsibility of the Warm Homes Agency?
I think it should be a responsibility of the Warm Homes Agency, yeah. Although I would just say it would take time to set that up, and we need to move quite quickly.
We'll come back to that. with Mel, because she's going to ask you about that.
Yes, I am. I wonder exactly what functions you think the Warm Homes Agency should have, Dion.
So I mentioned earlier, I think it will have a huge role to play in terms of, providing that information to the general public, so they're aware of what kind of support is being provided by government policy. We also think that due to, the kind of short time frame we have to upgrade 5 million homes and lift 1 million out of fuel poverty, they're going to need to quite quickly establish partnerships with organisations that are already embedded in communities that can provide, potentially in-person advice rather than just having
the partnership activity, really.
They're
not going to be required to directly necessarily engage with the public if they can use agencies and organisations like yours.
I think it would make the job easier, because right now the focus seems to be to enable, digital access to information on a website, maybe to have a phone line, but I don't necessarily think that's going to be enough to allow.
Do you think anyone will use it? Do you think anybody will know that the Warm Homes Agency even exists if it's not got an office on the high street? Or
it depends on the extent to which they get the word out right. It's a kind of alphabet agency no one's really heard of yet, so it's not going to quickly pop up into people's minds. It needs to work with people already established within communities, potentially get leaflets into GP surgeries as well and that kind of thing, but kind of leapfrog off what's already existing.
I always think that leaflets in GP surgeries are the ideal thing for communication with people. It's a strange thing that people think that's the way to do it, or pin something on a notice board. Okay, so
can I?
No,
sorry,
no. A bit. Sorry, I've got 8 minutes. So, in terms of the Warm Homes Agency and its role in improving consumer protection, coordinating local delivery at scale, how do you think that it can do that, Brenda?
I think the Warm Homes Agency has a horrendous range of tasks. I don't know how they're going to be able to do any of it really properly, but in terms of consumers, I would endorse what Dion said. It would be wonderful if there could be a greater link between personal advice, face-to-face, in the home advice to individual householders, particularly the fuel poor, because they need a lot of hand-holding. They both, before any measures are put in, even if it's with the landlord, and afterwards to make sure that they work properly.
Thank you. Dion, I'll come back to you. What steps do you think are needed to ensure that trusted, accessible advice for older people and digitally excluded groups and renters?
So for me to do this quickly in the kind of time frame before 2030, again, I think it's playing on what's already there in the community. So from the beginning, I think it's about getting the information out about the kinds of support that are available to renters, to homeowners, even directly to landlords, to the discussion we were having before about making sure they're thinking about their tenants and what installations will actually work for them. And the best way of doing that is probably to work directly with organisations that already reach deeply into communities and can put those Warm Home Agency branded.
I don't know then how the Warm Homes Agency remains accountable for any of this. If it just rolls everything out through all of through organisations, because then their ability to keep track of what other third parties are doing becomes more difficult.
Ultimately, someone needs to be accountable for the information that's out there in the public domain. And right now, I've mentioned before, there's a really low level of awareness of what kind of energy efficiency support is available. So it's about having responsibility for creating that information and, pushing it out through trusted networks, not just, absolutely anywhere you can get it through a letterbox. It's about working with, organisations that are already embedded in those communities.
Okay. And Peter, in terms of kind of trying to avoid the past retrofit quality issues, how can performance testing and accreditation be strengthened? And do you think that that is something that the Warm Homes Agency will be able to do, roll out and deliver?
I don't know if it should be charged with that responsibility per se, but it's got a huge role to play in building confidence with consumers about the outcomes that can be achieved through positive retrofit experiences. If we don't sort of address the very negative stories that there are at the moment and the underlying quality issues, people won't go for it, and if they don't go for it, there's no need for an agency. I think it's also really vital that we don't create a huge hiatus waiting for this uber monolith agency to be created and solve all these problems. Things need to be sorted out on quality assurance.
Will it be uber and monolith?
Well, there's a risk that there's a risk that you pin things onto it as long as the sort of process sort of continues to take a long time to establish it. People say, oh well, that's what the agency's going to do. That's what the agency's going to do, and things need to happen sooner than that. There was the big energy saving network, which is a simple grant to community-based organisation, could be rolled out by the department tomorrow if they used even a fraction of that money, or they provided embedded within the guidance to local authorities a requirement for a hand-holding service for the types of engagement with community-based organisations. There's lots of things that could be done in the interim before setting up this agency, but we hope it is comprehensive, and after all, as a National Energy Action campaign on warm homes for 45 years, it's great that there's going to be a bespoke agency, and we hope that it's very successful in a way that we've hoped to emulate.
I mean, I'm taking that as quite tongue-in-cheek, that you hope it will be very successful, because everything that everybody said so far is that it's going to be too big, everybody's going to put too much on, it's going to take too long, and we've already got lots of organisations in place that can better do, certainly, engagement at a grassroots level.
Probably needs a bit more clarity from government about the exact functions. I think that was a pretty sketchy part of the plan, and I think as that detail emerges, people understand how they can relate to that agency's day job.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you all for coming in and for your evidence so far. This Warm Homes plan, Brenda, you dubbed it the We Hope plan. Quite like that. It depends really on people moving from gas, for which you say there's no limit on turning off gas boilers. No one's going to prescribe you for having a gas boiler, and moving to electricity. But electricity is 3 or 4 times more expensive than gas. So how is this going to work? How is the Warm Homes plan going to deliver at scale on time if heat pumps are more expensive than gas? Peter, take it away.
The price of energy is absolutely crucial in all of this debate about fuel poverty. And a lot of it depends on what the government and DESNZ do in terms of reforming the energy market. They have this thing called REMA, which is reforming the energy market. And at the moment, there is no certainty that they are going to get rid of marginal cost pricing. And that means that the price of electricity will stay high in the foreseeable future. And that means the profits of the energy companies will stay high in the foreseeable future. And that means we will need a very substantial windfall tax in future. By far the biggest contribution that could be made to reducing fuel poverty is to reduce the cost of energy, particularly electricity. And we've still not recovered from the first oil crisis from 2010 and 2022, thanks to Russia. We're still £700 more expensive on an annual basis, and if that was perhaps £500 in real terms. And okay, the government's giving 150 back in a warm homes discount, but we still haven't got energy prices back to the level they were in relative terms in 2020, and goodness knows what's going to happen in the next few months.
Indeed. Thank you. You mentioned something earlier, Brenda, about the kind of fuel saving, of people paying 14p per unit for their storage heater, and you have the middle class, upper class family with a Tesla paying only 7p. What needs to happen to even that market?
Well, it would help if Ofgem did their job properly.
Okay, thank you. And
can you explain what you think they should be doing differently?
Sorry?
Can you explain what they should be doing differently?
Well, the short answer is I don't know. And what is a little bit worrying is that the wonderful Jonathan Brearley, the head of Ofgem, is now going to be the permanent secretary at DESNZ. So I only hope he has slightly higher standards at DESNZ.
You get a chance to grill him potentially, don't you?
Well, we do.
Regularly.
I'm curious. I'm curious what you mean by that, Brenda. It's quite a
hasty comment.
Quite a, yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Brenda, this is classic Brenda.
I mean, it's so sad that energy companies make fuel poverty worse in a lot of different ways, and somehow somebody needs to start reversing that trend.
Yes, your point is that the energy companies have been allowed to get away with not looking after their fuel poor customers. Thank you.
Peter, are tariffs part of the solution there? Or smart tariffs or smart metering, is that part of the solution?
Specifically, Ofgem could introduce a fairer rate for off-peak and on-peak units under Economy 7 and its kin. They could stop increasing the differential for those types of tariffs every time they increase an allowance under the price cap. They could ensure that there is greater parity between those tariffs dedicated to EVs and heating technologies by mandation. There's an incredible amount that they could do to regulate that outcome. At the moment, we just seem content that one supplier is doing rather well in that market and let them get on with it. So there is a time and a place for a bit more stick and regulation every now and again. Sorry, I completely dodged that question, haven't I?
Which was whether tariffing and smart meters are part of the solution.
They've got to be.
And what's the danger of people being left behind in that?
Smart meter rollout it sits behind all of this work as the sort of quiet brain in terms of the operation, and unless you're billed accurately, unless there's transparency about the data or the energy use data, things like half-hourly settlement, things like time of use tariffs, other types of arrangements that we're hoping to happen in the future are all not going to happen.
I'm running out of time. I'm going to come back to you, Brenda, in a minute, but Dion, I want to hear from you as well.
Yeah, very quick couple of points, hopefully. I think both, demand-side flexibility, smart tariffs, all can amplify the results of a warm homes plan. The data in the plan itself says, the regulation does the heavy lifting when you take minimum energy efficiency standards in social and private renter sectors and add it on top of an expanded warm home discount scheme. Supposedly 980,000 households will be lifted out of fuel poverty, and that's really before doing anything with energy prices. I guess it's based on a presumption energy prices will stay similar, which is not really what we're seeing right now, so it's a little bit uncertain. But that does amplify the point that, there isn't really anything in this plan about utilising smart tariffs and demand-side flexibility, making sure people aren't left behind, and that's certainly an addition that's missing. And then the other point, if I could very quickly make it, is around enhancing the support that is available for households in fuel poverty, which I do think is critical. So it's not just about lowering electricity bills, but making sure initiatives like the warm home discount are best targeted towards fuel poor households as they possibly can be.
That segues into a cheeky question I was going to ask you, which is off agenda and off grid, about fuel oil. And many of the Age UK pensioners will be sitting wondering how they're going to fill their tank. What can the government do to help consumers in poverty who are facing rising fuel oil prices this week?
Absolutely. I think it's also worth just highlighting at the beginning, we're already seeing those calls come through to our local HKs as well as our national advice line. It is really, really worrying. On a kind of national level, the government unfortunately hasn't progressed the ability to target households very well compared to where we were back in 2022, which means options like the alternative EBSS Energy Bill Support Scheme might be the kinds of options we need to look at again. I'd also point to the Crisis and Resilience Fund, which is coming in effect from April to be delivered by local authorities. And it might be the case that local authorities with high levels of, off-grid households reliant on oil heating can see a temporary or short-term uplift in the amount of money they receive, so they can help people who are
there's no short circuit we can do with warm home discount.
It's really hard to target off-grid households. I don't think energy suppliers necessarily have that information.
All off this agenda, I'm sure. Brenda, last word.
Thank you. The thing that's worrying me is that there is something in the region of 40 billion pounds of infrastructure investment required to upgrade the grid. I don't know if that's the right figure. I've found it very difficult to find an accurate, confirmed figure. I don't understand who's going to pay that 40 billion. I have a suspicion that it will be put onto us through our standing charges and unit rates rather than onto the energy companies, and I think that really should be questioned.
Thank you all.
Can I follow up? Can I follow up on Torkel's question about, and following up on your issue about the energy market reform? We will obviously need some kind of energy market reform, especially if we're going to be shifting away from fossil fuels onto more electricity. And interestingly, we were talking about data and smart metering and so forth. I've been campaigning for an energy social tariff, but my concern about an energy social tariff is everybody seems to think that it's got to be really clunky. Like in the 1970s, we had NHS glasses. Everybody knew you had your glasses from the NHS because they were the rubbish ones. Shouldn't we be having an energy social tariff which has all of the possibilities of demand-side flexibility, smart metering, and indeed passporting towards the kind of warm homes package that we're talking about? Would that enable us to be able to tackle some of the problems about fuel poverty while we are reforming the market?
Can I start on that? If we have a social tariff that actually reduces the costs for the low-income households, and it puts those costs onto the profligate households, you're almost having a policy that will be preventing the growth of all electric homes. It's very difficult to get a social tariff and increased electricity use in the home to work together. If you look at the other side of the coin, like I was with marginal pricing, there's different ways in which we could have a market. You could, I don't know which is the right one. I don't think that we're looking for the right ones at the moment, but you can have a situation whereby the energy company is paid what it bids, as opposed to the highest price that is bid. There is a wonderful suggestion, which I happen to be a great fan of, called a green power pool, which comes out of Michael Grubben, University College London, whereby the present market is subdivided into a green market, which is clean and cheaper, and a dirty market, which is more expensive. So there's two markets out there, and the green power pool is given to the fuel pool. It's all the targeting problems that we were mentioning. But there are different solutions out there, and we're not getting to them.
Okay.
I think it's really important to target those households that aren't on means-tested benefits for support. That's the key flaw with the current warm home discount scheme. But the virtue of the warm home discount scheme is it is invisible and does what you said. Really, it works in the background. It doesn't need to be applied for. It provides an automatic rebate off your energy bill without you needing to know about it. And it's vital that we provide that type of support going forward to households. I think if you are able to reduce the cost of energy, provide a discount or a unit rate reduction, you're much more likely to have those conversations with households about those type of other areas you've mentioned once their basic needs for warmth and healthy home are taken into consideration.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, in a nutshell, we kind of have a social tariff with a warm home discount. It's just some kind of targeted discount on a particular good or service for particular people. So the question for us at HK is really how you make a limited pot of funding, given it's cross-subsidised.
It doesn't change behaviours though.
No, it doesn't. And
if you're looking to change behaviours and you're looking to shift away from gas and dirty fossil fuels to electricity, and at the moment the market is distorted, so therefore electricity is more expensive than gas, we need to support people into making that shift. Absolutely. And the warm homes discount doesn't do any of those things.
Yep, I fully understand and appreciate that. I suppose the point I'm just generally trying to make is, for us, it's a matter of targeting it effectively as possible at those households who probably will benefit the most from those changes. And I think, once you do get the support to those people, like Peter said, you can engage with them on those subjects of, what kinds of improvements can be made to the home. Because if you are targeting by income as well, you probably have a good basis to assess whether they're eligible for grants to improve a home, particularly in the case of homeowners who won't be covered by MEES, for example. So it's a foundation from which you can, attach it to other policies and create a more holistic approach.
It could be a passport.
Can I just come back on the electricity price is distorted? Electricity will always be expensive if what you've got to do is have a large piece of capital equipment to generate it. whether that's a wind turbine, a thermal power station, a nuclear reactor, or whatever. Only one unit comes out for every 3 that goes in with a thermal power station. It's not that it's distorted, with respect. It is that it's an expensive fuel. That's why it's better if we have a heat pump and we start correcting that imbalance, because you've got a coefficient of performance of 3. So 3 go in, 1 comes out, and then you get 3 lots of unit of heat and you're back to sort of square one. With gas, it just comes in a pipe. You don't need a big power station. So the idea that we're going to get parity between electricity and gas is probably not realistic.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Brenda, as you mentioned, the very high costs of the grid upgrade, something we've been increasingly hearing is the potential for using more battery storage, whether that's individual households or if they haven't got the space, then on a more on a communal basis. Do you see that as part of the answer to the very high capital costs of the grid upgrade?
Well, it will certainly help. And if you get the right heat pumps, that will help too. I mean, if you have a ground source heat pump, it's much better than an air source heat pump for the grid. That is true. One of the difficulties for the fuel poor, I'm not sure where some of these schemes to help the fuel poor will go. There is I think, a scheme called tenant power. And what it means is that a tenant with a landlord is given PV on the roof, but actually the amount of benefit that they get is very small. It's about a 20% discount on a small amount of electricity that's generated for their flat, whereas perhaps the landlord gets all of the communal lighting paid for. So there are some difficulties with some of these schemes, but batteries are an excellent idea in terms of helping the grid. I would say I'm not actually sure how much the grid knows. I mean, I'm in the process. I've got PV panels going on the house at this precise moment, and we've just put in a battery. But I don't know that the grid knows we've done it. I don't know that the grid has taken that into account at my local substation. So if I go to them and say I want a heat pump, they'll say there's no capacity. But I've actually provided my own capacity. But I don't know how tied up that gets. That's
They would
just
notice
ignorance.
your energy consumption reducing, presumably, if you're smart metered.
Sorry?
They would notice that your energy consumption is reducing if you're smart metered.
Not your network company, your supplier would.
But there is a way of gathering that
so.
data.
I hope so.
With the data, yeah, absolutely. Someone would have visibility of it, and when there's half-hourly settlement, the DNO will have to have visibility on it because they'll have to recover their GWAS charges in a different way.
Well, thank you all very much for your evidence and the short consultation we had there, which might be a forerunner of how the Warm Homes Plan could be implemented, of course. Thank you all very much. That's the end of the session. We'll change welcome back to this afternoon session of the Energy Security Net Zero Select Committee and our one-off session on the Warm Homes Plan. And welcome to our second panel. If you can introduce yourselves, starting on this side, please.
Hi, I'm Sam Perry. I'm Policy Lead for the Heat Workforce at the Trades Union Congress.
Good afternoon, I'm Louise Shooter. I'm the Head of Heat Decarbonisation at Energy UK.
Good afternoon, I'm Jo Wheeler. I'm Co-Head of Policy and Places at UK Green Building Council, which is a charity and a membership organisation.
Thank you all very much. Lizzie Collins.
Thank you, Chair. So I want to ask a bit about workforce and supply chain for the Warm Homes Plan. And the Warm Homes Plan says it's going to deliver a projected 180,000 high-quality jobs by 2030. But we've also heard evidence that ending the eco scheme is now leading to current job losses and a current loss of skill. So, firstly, how can the government create business certainty and create the ability to deliver the Warm Homes Plan? And what else is needed to ensure that those jobs are delivered as well? Thanks. Anyone can go.
I'm happy to go first. I think the scale of the opportunity is really welcome and obviously matches the ambition of investing a significant amount of money into this sector. In terms of the particular targets around clean heat, there's an aspiration to create 18,000 jobs for the heat pump sector, up from around 8,500 MCS accredited installers currently. And similarly on the heat network side, an 18,000 new jobs target from a base of around 4,000 skilled contractors currently. It's true that the kind of hiatus created by the end of the eco scheme and the delay in kind of new funding streams coming forward has created a significant impact on the sector. It was very well put in the previous session. The Insulation Assurance Authority estimates that around 12,000 people have already been made redundant as a result of that hiatus. Kind of the sooner clarity on the shape and the objectives of future schemes can be provided, the more helpful for the sector. Obviously, the commitment around prioritising procurement from the existing eco supply chain for other government grant schemes is very welcome. But essentially, while the kind of investment is extremely important in kind of creating that and building that nascent market, what's really needed as well is the kind of broader enabling environment to create a long-term kind of pipeline of demand.
So what do you mean by enabling environment? What does that mean in practical terms?
So I mean further action to reduce electricity prices, strengthening regulation around the trajectory of decarbonising heat, and also more developed for the green finance sector as well, so that we eventually do create a sector that's kind of self-sustaining and organic.
Thank you. Any further comments before I move on?
Just to say, I would agree with all of that, and just we need solid plans in place as soon as possible, because after the ending of the Eco4 scheme, there was no functional successor in place. So we need those plans, to be being done right now, so that we don't have that hiatus, and so that people don't leave the industry. Because what we're hearing is that people will leave and they won't come back. They'll go to other sectors which they perceive to be a bit more stable, perhaps new build, perhaps the non-domestic retrofit sector, and all the skills that have been built up over the last 3 decades will be lost to the housing retrofit world if we don't get on with it very quickly.
Thank you. And Sam, if I could come to you now for a TUC view on how that workforce transition can be managed, particularly when we're thinking about skills bottlenecks and retention of skilled workers as well. What are your views there?
So obviously the workforce is hugely important here, and the the problems that have been caused by the lack of certainty there are obvious and have been spoken to. I think we are welcoming the Warm Homes Plan because it does provide more of that certainty in terms of policy space, but also in terms of investment and training and things like this. And I think without that, we'd be in a far more difficult space. So we're very pleased with that direction we've found ourselves in. There are tens of thousands of workers already in adjacent spaces. I mean, eco is part of that, but the whole sector or the whole industry is a lot wider than that. We've got home improvements, we've got RMI, heating services, etc. Gas is a huge number of workers there, many of whom are in very good jobs, and those are this does need to be a story of preserving and celebrating good jobs, not only creating jobs for jobs' sake. And so I think the kind of story of transition, the story of warm homes, does need to be about using that workforce as much as possible, helping them through a process of professionalisation. So it's a sort of process of upgrading and securing jobs. New admissions are part of this, of course, but given that there are tens of thousands of folks already in this space, our priority is to make sure that they are protected through this. I did mention the gas workers. We've got 150,000 gas safe registered workers who at the moment don't necessarily have a place within the warm homes plan. So the transition mechanisms, the actual kind of da-dum of getting them from servicing or fitting gas jobs, gas boilers into servicing.
Do those workers currently have any idea about how they move from gas onto newer technologies? Is that clear to them?
I mean, if one word, no, but some will. It depends on the firms that they're with. So some firms, some larger, more professional firms that are thinking about strategy in longer term, have already diversified into heat pumps and other technologies, and with some union pressure, it must be said, are supporting workers to transition in a handful of cases. That is not the general story, and in this fragmented industry where we don't have a lot of very good, secure employers across a lot of it, that although the need is clearly there, if you look 15, 10 years down the line, maybe there won't be so many gas engineers needed. The mechanisms for them doing that is not there. So we very much encourage government to work with firms and trade unions and others to make sure that those mechanisms are there.
Thank you. I wanted to talk to ask a little bit now about the manufacture side rather than the fitting side of some of those newer technologies. So there's a target for 70% of heat pumps to be domestically manufactured by 2035. It's been described by Regen as an ambitious target. How realistic is it?
Happy to go. So our members' view is that the 70% target is achievable and actually potentially deliverable earlier if the UK market scales as expected. So the UK already has a significant manufacturing capability, and existing facilities could supply a large share of domestic demand, but only if the market grows consistently. So the biggest determinant of domestic manufacturing will be market certainty rather than technical capability.
Is that market certainty currently there?
I would say not enough, no. So we need policies that encourage UK production and supply chains, clear incentives and signals that they should invest. Otherwise, imported units may continue to dominate, even if the UK domestic capacity does grow. So members also told me that there's currently significant heat pump manufacturing overcapacity in Europe, following a rapid factory expansion after the energy crisis. So several new European factories have been built and are currently operating below capacity due to slower than expected market growth. So this means that companies could still, be importing heat pumps, even if we were concentrating on UK factories.
Thank you, Louise.
Yeah, I just wanted to support the point that the heat pump manufacturers in our membership also really welcome this target. They do see it as both ambitious but realistic at the same time. And that they tell us that the most important kind of driver for growing capacity in the manufacturing sector is the implementation of the Future Home Standard, which does promise to require solar and clean heat and high efficiency as a standard. But that will be absolutely essential for a kind of base load of demand as we grow demand in the retrofit sector for clean heat.
Thank you. Moving on to Graham.
Thank you, Chair. Is you mentioned the need for market certainty to grow businesses. Both Sam and Jo kind of alluded to that. Is the expanded boiler upgrade scheme funding sufficient to meet increases in demand while keeping costs manageable as well? Jo, actually, we'll start with you.
So the boiler upgrade scheme has really helped to stimulate demand and grow the installer base, but our view is that grants alone cannot scale to the 600 plus installations per year that are going to be needed in the 2030s.
What else would be needed?
Well, we need, I was just going to say, we need government money, government subsidy to be directed at those who need it most, as we heard in the previous session. So to drive take-up of heat pumps, we need structural reforms, in our view. Things like, as has been already discussed today, fixing the price imbalance between gas and electricity. So the MCS Foundation estimates that moving policy levies off electricity onto general taxation could save heat pump households up to over £500 a year, providing fiscal incentives to really drive uptake of retrofit and purchase of heat pumps and other technologies to maintain that sort of long-term self-sustaining market. So I talked in my previous evidence session about the need for a warm home stamp duty where householders, warm home stamp duty rebate where householders, after moving in, if they undertake retrofit within a certain period of time after moving in, then they get a tax rebate on their stamp duty to really make this an attractive thing that people think about at that point when they're most likely to do up their home, which is prior to moving in. If you miss that trigger point, it can be years before people then want to go through the hassle, frankly, of retrofitting again.
We heard in the last session, you just mentioned again there, Joe, about the necessity to target at those fuel poor or in fuel poverty. Is there enough consumer knowledge and confidence about heat pump technology that would necessitate that kind of upward drive, people asking for it as well, or is that something the government needs to work on as well? Sam?
No, there's not. There's not enough public awareness of this, and I think this is a key element of consumer demand. The boiler upgrade scheme is incredibly important and will drive a lot of demand, and so we're very much in favour of that, as long as the levels are continually reviewed, etc. But yeah, consumer demand is hugely important, and when I speak to workers, as I do, who go into people's homes, folks are not aware of this as an option. It is important, and it speaks to the point that was made here that a lot of home heating decisions are made under duress. They're made in a stressful situation where it suddenly needs to happen. These are not necessarily long thought out plans, and so we do need, and workers tell me this all the time, we need to grow public awareness. Perhaps this is a role of Warm Hose Agency, or it's got a long list, or of other agencies to make sure that people are aware that this is something that happens and can forward plan to make sure that when they do need to go through this sudden change, this sudden upgrade, which is where a lot of this stuff is going to be happening, that they know the options available. It also potentially speaks to the need for certainty in this space. I think policy certainty. The Warm Homes Plan does provide some clarity on the direction that's being taken. We would like to see more of that, and also with the dates of the various other schemes that were talked about in the previous session, clarity on exactly when those will come into place, and also with hydrogen for home heating. We're waiting a decision from government on what way they'll go with that. Before we have that, there is worry within the sector about where to invest, and I think that also feeds across to the consumer base as well. They're not knowing the options available to them.
I think this might be one for possibly Louise, but anyone else chip in. Do you think the government's right that upfront costs of heat pumps will fall in the future as it expands? Have they got that right, or if not, how do we need to make sure it expands faster? The costs come down faster.
Yeah, so this is a challenging area because obviously it's a mature technology. It's used in the majority of homes in many of the coldest countries in Europe. And in fact, we are seeing kind of new standards introduced that, if anything, will increase product standards around smart capability. So potentially the area in which we can see reductions on the upfront cost is related to growing the installer supply chain, having more availability of skills and experience of skills of installers working in the teams needed to make the switch from a gas system to a heat pump system is potentially where we'll see some of the cost savings. And there is this ambition in the Warm Homes Plan for a kind of 3-day install. However, I would say that it's important to kind of think about this switch from majority gas fueled homes to electrification as an infrastructure investment that's needed to protect consumers from volatile prices and to ultimately bring down bills and support energy security. And therefore, subsequent upgrades or changes to that initial heat pump unit after 15 years will be much lower because the system is compatible now with that system. So, there are references in the plan to the switch to town gas in the 60s and 70s, and this is an infrastructure investment that will generate much bigger savings for the individuals and also everyone benefiting from the system.
And just finally, as I'm running out of time, as I alluded to in the last session as well, is there any evidence that scrapping the boiler upgrade scheme could see money saved on energy bills, as we've seen proposed this week?
Energy UK has done some analysis around how rebalancing policy costs on energy bills to lower electricity prices would reduce the lifetime cost over a 15-year period of an air source heat pump relative to a gas boiler, and that would enable a reduction in the grant, the initial grant for the upfront cost, because you'd be able to spread out that cost over the 15-year period with the right finance products in place. However, yes, there is there is kind of support continue to be required to drive this change and to help households afford these technologies and to benefit from them.
Thanks very much. Louise, you mentioned the switch from town gas to natural gas, and I'm just thinking about what Sam said about ensuring consumers plan ahead for the switch. Are there good lessons for us in how that switch happened that we should be applying to this transition, Sam?
I think there definitely are. It was a national rollout that created a huge number of public jobs or semi-public jobs to make what was essentially quite a small change to people's systems, but was carried out in a very systemic way. People knew what it was coming; they could factor that in. From my understanding of it, it was a lesson in the kind of visit once thing.
That's rather. Having been through the process, it's not quite like that this time.
Maybe not. I wasn't there, but
I don't remember the last one either. But just for the record, I mean, this is getting it down to 3 days would be an achievement. It's a bit more than that at the moment, but it's really quite intrusive. So what are the lessons from town gas for us?
Engaging a workforce early, like clear public direction, liaison with communities or consumers in advance so they know exactly what's happening. I think that's done in many cases by local authorities or combined authorities with their local grant schemes and the social housing schemes. It's less coordinated for obvious reasons with bus upgrades or with eco upgrades and things. And so I think, the clear kind of public delivery spirit, I think, is probably the key way of this.
Joanne?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention the kind of soft skills that are needed in retrofit. So, the role of the retrofit coordinator, I think, is vital here. So someone who goes into the home and kind of walks the person through what's going to happen and liaises with the contractors and sort of sorts everything out on behalf of the householder. So, that kind of hand-holding process is really key if we're going to, encourage people to get a heat pump. Having been through the process myself, I know that without a retrofit coordinator, I should say, that, it can involve several visits and things and can be a bit confusing even when you kind of know about, the technology. So definitely that sort of hand-holding support is really crucial.
Thank you.
Thank you. I want to talk about heat pump targets because the Warm Homes Plan has a target of 450,000 heat pumps to be installed annually by 2030, including new builds. And the 7th Carbon Budget Balance Pathway envisaged 450,000 plus an estimated 200 new build homes. So, first question is, do you think the revised target of 450,000 will be sufficient to meet the UK's climate commitments?
Just looking for my notes on this, excuse me.
The Climate Change Committee's Balanced Pathway talks about the need for 600,000 heat pumps installed by 2028. Obviously, the boiler upgrade scheme has expanded the scope of technologies that it now supports, including air-to-air and heat batteries. So it may be that there's an acceleration of adoption of other kinds of technologies that helps progress heat decarbonisation, and heat networks added into that as well. But yes, it's 450,000 doesn't align with the CCC's estimations.
Okay, and those other forms that are coming up, they're not covered by the Warm Homes Plan. They're just coming up spontaneously by people who can afford to pay for them.
Is this the heat batteries and the air-to-air that I mentioned? So they are mentioned in the Warm Homes Plan as part of the solution, particularly for kind of space-constrained properties that maybe aren't suitable for an air-to-water system. These kind of properties would also be suitable for a heat network as well in kind of city centre, densely populated areas.
I just wanted to make the point that the 450,000 target includes both new and existing buildings, so 200,000 for new build homes and 250,000 target for existing homes, as I understand it. So
that's what I was saying. It's 450,000 including new homes. Whereas the balanced pathway is 450,000 plus.
Exactly. So we would agree with the Committee on Climate Change that no, it's not enough. Yeah.
Okay. Did you want to add anything, Sam? Or?
No.
Okay. So, if there is this projected shortfall of installations, how can we address that? And I'll start with Louise, because it sounds like that might be through alternative means.
So I think there is a role for improving kind of uptake of a range of technologies. It's in particular on the heat networks point, there was a lot of ambition in the plan around accelerating kind of development of this new town centre, city centre infrastructure. And it will kind of start to scale from 2030. But it's really important that we start the enabling framework now to help support that growth. And obviously zoning plays a role in that, the new consumer protections, and there was some capital grant as well, which is really helpful to see. But it's really important that we kind of have local authorities supporting this, as they will be the zone coordinating role.
And are you concerned at the moment they don't have the expertise to support, or?
It's certainly a kind of concern, because it's not going to be a statutory duty of a local authority to perform the role of the zoning coordinator body. And under the advanced zoning pilots, which have preceded this new regulation, there's been a kind of more centralised capacity building done through the net zero hubs. And it's important that capacity building does continue to roll out as the zones start to be designated from this year, because local authorities are asking to be done. They're being asked to do quite a lot as part of the Warm Homes Plan in terms of the MEES enforcement that was discussed in the previous session, the zoning, etc. So.
Joanne, did you have anything?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, obviously the target is important, but it's almost sort of less important than the mechanisms that enable the whole kind of retrofit ecosystem to happen, and we haven't got at the moment. So priority needs to be given to creating that policy framework, that long-term policy certainty, consistency that will allow installation rates to scale consistently and sustainably. And I think it's our sort of strong feeling that in terms of kind of implementation of the Warm Home Plan, it needs to be very much co-designed both with industry, who obviously have a lot of expertise and experience of delivering retrofit programs and what works and what doesn't, and what can go wrong, obviously, but also communities and householders, to actually kind of bring them into the conversation as well, so that we know how the heat pump, what's preventing heat pump adoption at the moment, and really kind of sit down with people and ask them, because I think there's a bit of a lack of research there at the moment.
Sam, did you have anything to
add? The heat pumps are obviously a key focus of the Warm Homes Plan and also the CCC reporting. We're a little more technology agnostic, in that it's about a key focus obviously needs to be fuel poverty alleviation or cost of living crisis alleviation more generally. And so we'd like to see further options considered, not taken off the table, essentially, I think. I mean, there are newer approaches to heat pumps, like the air-to-air piece, or mixed systems within homes, which I think the Warm Homes Plan nicely supports, without it feeling like this necessarily. I think there's a space about this, the perfect being the enemy of the good, right? The kind of ideal when we're talking about retrofit is often that the whole house is gutted and you start over afresh, and it's just not realistic for a lot of people. And so if we could do this piece by piece, making it better in whatever is reasonable and available to individual households, I think that's just a strong space that we should be in.
Are there other, so it talks about alternatives like heat batteries, but obviously you mentioned, Louise, that in dense city centre locations, heat networks would potentially be a good use, and yet that's something we're still not really seeing any action on. Is that something you feel should be approached through the plan, or is that something that just has to be dealt with separately?
In terms of supporting heat networks to develop? Yes, so one of the challenges for heat networks is that for low carbon heat networks, they're purchasing electricity or generating electricity as non-domestic suppliers. So a non-domestic electricity cost is essentially passed on to consumers, which makes it proportionally more expensive than a kind of gas counterfactual. So it's really important that the government kind of progresses the intention that is stated in the plan to look at reducing non-domestic electricity costs, as that would help enable the kind of transition and make it much more kind of economically viable for these city centre buildings, flats, and equally kind of offices and commercial buildings around them to also make the transition.
And what policies would accelerate cost reductions and reduce reliance on the volatile electricity price ratio?
Is this for the sector broadly and domestic consumers?
I think we're thinking domestic consumers on this.
So from our perspective, reducing electricity prices really is at the core of making the most of this £15 billion investment and helping people to switch from gas systems to electric systems, protecting them from the volatility that we're seeing. There are many ways that can be done in terms of reducing electricity prices. Energy UK published a paper last year looking at levers that can be pulled from across the sector. Ultimately, policy costs and levies are disproportionately loaded on electricity prices, so that's one of the main ways in which we can lower electricity prices effectively and quickly.
We would agree with the need to rebalance electricity prices. Fabric is also obviously another quite obvious way of bringing down electricity prices. So heating systems work best in efficient homes, and without fabric upgrades, heat pumps might risk being oversized and more expensive to run for bill payers. So one of our worries of the Warm Homes Plan is that it doesn't sort of recommend that kind of independent whole house assessment in order to get the right measure for the right home at the right time. We need a certain amount of insulation in order for the heating systems to work.
Before I bring Torquil in to probe a bit further on what you just said about fabric, you talked before, Joanne, about the factors that prevent adoption of heat pumps. It wasn't clear whether you had some evidence to share with us about what those are. But if you have, please do.
I think there is some evidence, but I don't think there's enough. I don't think there's kind of been that kind of national conversation with householders yet about kind of the switch to heat pumps and how people feel about it. I think there's those of us who are enthusiastic about it, like myself, who've gone and got one and it's working great, and I'm a real advocate for them. But there's I think a lot of people haven't kind of, as was said in the session before, haven't realised that they're probably going to no longer be able to have a gas boiler, over the next, say, 10, 15 years.
So you think that the resistance comes from the fact people don't know that this is going to happen?
Well, I don't...
Or do you think there's something more about people think it's a really bad idea,
I think there's a combination. I think some people don't really know and haven't sort of paid much attention to it. They just have their gas boiler, it works, and they haven't thought about it, and then it can be a kind of distress purchase, as we heard about earlier. There's others who've been put off by kind of negative media stories about heat pump bills being massive, and where they've been installed badly, people having a bad experience with them. So I think and then of course there's the electricity price issue.
Yeah, Sam.
I mean, I don't disagree, but the energy price issue is very significant. I mean, this applies to energy, electricity bills, but also for gas bills. We do need to desperately bring these down for domestic consumers, but also for industry. I think if it can be shown that what we're looking at is not a nice to have or a shiny new piece of kit or something the government wants you to have, but something that's going to save you money, then that's the space we need to be in. And I think that public information on this is a key part of that.
Yeah, so make it really compelling financially is your advice. Yeah, great. Graham.
Just very briefly, Joe, and Sam, you've mentioned it there as well, when you're talking about the need for more public education, do we need to make sure we're also being really open at the beginning about how much this costs? And if so, what window or what bracket do you think we should be saying this will cost you X, but it will save you X? Or certainly on the first part, maybe the second part's a bit harder. But on the first part, how should we be saying to the public, this is a good thing, this will do this, but it will cost this? It probably ties back to the questions I was asking earlier about the upgrade scheme too.
I think that's actually sort of a bit of how long is a piece of string question, to be honest, because it depends on what standard your house is in the first place, what technologies you're going to put into it. Are you getting the full heat pump, solar, battery, and insulating the whole thing? In which case, it'll be expensive. I think.
What do you mean by expensive? Again, it's important that we need to have some. I know it's really difficult, but I think we need to have some definition. Otherwise, the risk is people go, it's too expensive. They will put a larger cost on it.
Well, I think. I mean, honestly, it depends whether you're talking about like a Georgian property or a 1950s property. The standard of the house in the first place affects the price so much, but we're probably talking over 10,000, more like maybe 20,000 at it, as a how long is a piece of string if I'm kind of pushed on an answer. And I think it's difficult to talk in terms of payback time about these technologies. I mean, I can't tell you how much nicer my house is since we got rid of our oil boiler and we put in a heat pump and battery, etc. And it's lovely to run, it's efficient to run, and our whole life experience is transformed. But putting a price on that is very difficult, of course. But there's no, I would absolutely do it again because the co-benefits of doing it have been brilliant, even if my payback time of spending that upfront capital is going to be quite long. And the hope is that, of course, when I sell my house, then the purchaser will recognise that as well, and that comes back to the idea of the stamp duty incentive. So if you move into a house that's already had this work done, then you automatically get the rebate because you don't need to retrofit it. So those kind of incentives just drive the market. And just to add that there's no shortage of owner-occupier able to pay money going into houses. We estimate about 13 to 15 billion is spent each year on new kitchens. So it's not like there's not the money to spend in owner-occupier, able to pay owner-occupier homes. It's just that they're not thinking to spend it on this technology at the moment.
Thank you. I would encourage our media people to clip your last section with your glowing endorsement of why this is such a great thing and play it or get the Warm Homes Agency to use your evidence, Joanne. No disrespect to Louise or Sam, who are doing a fine job as well, by the way. Just encapsulates it.
Are your bills lower?
January's expensive, there's no getting away from that, but I've done the whole thing of solar, battery and heat pump. The January bill was quite high, but last summer my bills were like, I was positive because I was exporting to the grid, so over the year it's not expensive. Cheaper than when I was on oil. And
had you already done lots of retrofit beforehand to make sure that your house was properly insulated and double glazed and all of the... Yeah.
And I got a loan to do so from my local authority, via my local authority.
This is getting better. It's all cool.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you all for coming in, and Joanne, to pick up on what you said there, your personal experience as well as your professional experience. All the heat pumps in the world make no difference if you're losing energy to your windows and doors and walls. You know, and is there a risk with the Warm Homes plan of just underplaying that fabric first approach of just make sure your home is sealed first?
Yes, I think the short answer is so. Historically, UK retrofit policies emphasised a fabric first approach. So insulation, air tightness improvements before, and then reducing heat demand before installing the low carbon heating systems. We think the Warm Home Plan places greater emphasis on the heating technology deployment, and I think, as I mentioned before, the key thing here is getting the right solution for the right home, and that does probably require a kind of whole home assessment. Because each home is different, so coming into each home and doing an assessment of the property and looking at what that particular property needs by way of insulation in order to make it efficient.
Might a cheaper, quicker way of saving the planet be just to allow people to insulate their homes, just without having to go the whole hog doing the solar storage battery?
Well, yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to come to
I'd like to offer a slightly different view. From our perspective, we do kind of welcome the pivot from fabric first to low carbon technologies, because from a bill's perspective, that combination of clean heat, solar and a battery derives much more significant bill savings immediately for a household than relatively long payback periods for insulation. We did some research last year across 4 different archetypes of kind of typical homes of middle-income families, so flats, detached, semi-detached and a terrace, and looking at the kind of most cost-effective measures for investment versus bill saving. Mm-hmm. And then only one of those scenarios was fabric, one of the measures that kind of was cost-effective to do in terms of the bill saving, which I think was cavity wall. And across those 4 different archetypes, the average bill saving was 44 to 64%. And we also did model the use of finance in that, so a 10-year loan, and then after that 10-year period, that's when they would see those significant savings. So we do welcome it from a bill's perspective. And, there is an ambition in the plan to see 1 million fabric measures installed, primarily probably driven through the minimum energy efficiency standards.
Yeah, more people would do that if there wasn't such a scandal about bad delivery of insulation, particularly solid wall insulation. What can be done to incentivise that again, to give people faith in the market and to bring costs down, because you're talking a lot of money for low-income households.
Absolutely, and I think that just shows that the role of advice is absolutely crucial across all of this. Obviously, in the previous session, talked about the importance of the Warm Homes Agency in providing a centralised digital platform that complements the many advice providers that are already in the market. I think the Welsh Investment Bank did a really interesting piece of research a few years ago where they looked at providing a loan, and it was only really effective when they actually did it in combination with advice, so that people felt trusting in the kind of decision they were making in terms of not only the measures but also the installer that they were working with, that they were able to compare quotes and supported to do so.
And Sam, you can maybe help us as well. How does the government build trust into the system there? What do they have to do?
So the government has committed to kind of reforming the consumer protections framework, and I think that's probably the biggest driver in terms of people feeling secure and confident that they are hiring a kind of accredited installer to do their work, and crucially that there is a clear pathway to redress for them if something goes wrong.
Poor quality work often results, which I think is part of the question here, often results from folks who don't know what they're doing. So if we have, which is our concern in every space, if we target good jobs, these are secure jobs, professional jobs that people know what they're doing, they're well trained, they're supported to keep only one job and be able to reliably live on that and make it a profession, then the work that comes out of the back of that is higher quality work. At the moment, we do have a large, I touched on it earlier, but it's a very fragmented, variable industry, and there are firms that are not supporting workers in that way. And unfortunately, we get results that come naturally from that position of untransparent supply chains or poorly trained workers who are not able to do what we all expect them to do, and if properly trained and supported, they would be able to do, which is high quality work that makes people cuts bills and makes people's homes comfortable and retain their value.
What we all want. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, can I just follow up on the Eco4 and just ask about the transition from Eco4 and what that means for existing workforce in Eco4? Because it is a challenging period, isn't it? I mean, the previous panel talked about loss of skills, loss of businesses, and kind of fragmentation. And I wonder what your view is about how the government proposes to manage that move away from Eco4 into warm homes.
It's a worrying development because there are lots of jobs on the line. I think what I said there applies to a lot of these firms, unfortunately, but it is obviously a loss. I think the plans already put in place to ensure that firms facing a loss of work as a result of this are favoured for future work is an important thing to do, but I would like that to come, or we would like that to come with conditionality, so that we're not perpetuating fragile firms that are not producing the best jobs as they could. So we'd like this to be a process of upgrading and professionalisation as firms move from supporting eco to supporting other aspects of the Warm Homes Plan delivery.
And would they do that themselves in terms of their ability to demonstrate that they've upgraded their skills?
Yeah, I think firms are in dialogue with their trade unions, of course, should be taking a key role in upskilling their workers and protecting them to provide good services out of the back of that. It is worth saying, I mean, this industry in itself doesn't necessarily do that in as much as adjacent industries. And
a lot of subcontracting, don't you? That tends to be the thing. So you're talking about firms, but very often it can be sole traders or micro businesses.
That's right. So there's an accountability at that top tier or the higher tiers of firms that they are deliberately sometimes not engaging in. They don't want to know what happens in the murkier regions of their subcontracting. And I think the responsibility to build firms to make sure that does happen. And it is the point I was going to make is also that the UK is a bit of an outlier in how much we often put in to training workers and supporting them. Almost every comparison with the European countries, that firms are just not supporting workers in the way that is the kind of Western standard, and so I think we can ask a lot more from firms in this space.
I just add a thought. I would agree, and I think our members' feeling is that strong enforcement and accountability are really needed to remove those poor quality installers and restore trust in the retrofit market. So things like spot checks. So random inspections of installations of a percentage of projects, say 5%, or like a two-strike rule where installers are they're repeatedly failing quality checks, they lose their accreditation. So there needs to be a kind of form of jeopardy for getting this wrong, and businesses know that they will lose their license if they're not delivering properly, because the problem is that those poorly delivering businesses can undercut those who are doing a good job and then give the sector a sort of poor reputation.
Thank you very much. Now, I'm conscious we may well have votes, in which case, Lizzie, you've got quite a lot to get through, but
I'll do my best.
Do your best. Yes.
Actually, the things I wanted to ask about follow on from this conversation, I wanted to talk about the Warm Homes Agency and accreditation. So this committee has recommended that that the government should explore a retrofit workforce accreditation through the Warm Homes Agency, and also licensing based on something like the Gas Safe Register. We heard in the first panel, Dr. Boardman said something very similar. So can I take it from the previous comments the panel would agree with having an accreditation and licensing scheme through the Warm Homes Agency, or would you have a different model?
So I would say that a lot of the kind of government-funded measures that we're going to see through the plans, that will primarily be microgeneration, heat pumps, etc., do typically require MCS. So, most firms will already be seeking an accreditation in that way. And I think whether it's mandatory or whether it's kind of driven through grant, the most essential thing is kind of what Joanne talked to there around the auditing and monitoring regime and the realistic prospect that you won't be able to continue if poor work is discovered.
There are some parts of the workforce that don't have accreditation licensing, aren't they? So quite a lot of the building trade. That's correct, isn't it? So there are elements, particularly on the fabric side, where there's essentially no centralised quality control.
Yes, and obviously Trustmark is the government-backed kind of standard for more of that kind of fabric measure side. And so with that already in place, it's the question is also whether it's consumer awareness of being able to ask, are you a Trustmark registered business, going on Trustmark's website and corroborating that, logo on their website, for example.
But we know that there's been huge problems with particularly installation. So the current picture hasn't worked under certain schemes. So do you actually think it's just enforcement or consumer knowledge about the current Trustmark scheme, or do you think something additional is needed?
I would say whether it's a kind of mandatory scheme or not, the most kind of important element of it is the enforcement and consumers knowing that they need to ask for this accreditation and to go and verify it on the website.
Okay.
There have obviously been problems with Trustmark, which I think have borne out in the eco thing. There haven't been in MCS. There is a big contrast in the schemes here, and so I think we'd like the Warm Hose Agency or an accreditation scheme through this to take the best elements of it's what works. I think we also could see elements of the past 2035 and 2030 schemes where there is that oversight to works that are carried out. I think this could be more universally applied, and I think the move towards local authority led delivery or local authority / combined authority influence delivery, I think could be a key part of that, and would tie in the conversation that was had earlier about MEES and about Future Home Standard as well. The slight related point is that these at the moment are, and it touches on what I mentioned earlier, but these are outcome-oriented accreditation, so there are routes to complain about when it's gone wrong. They're not routes to set up good jobs that perform well, to professionalise this sector. And so I think there's a space in this, which I think Trustmark had this ambition to some extent to professionalise, but it obviously hasn't quite worked in the intended outcome. So there's a lot of work that could be done in that area.
Thank you. And I wanted to move on to testing after installation to make sure households are getting the performance that they want. So Joanne, just a moment ago you were talking about random testing, about 2 strikes rule. Could you expand on that, and are there any other suggestions from the panel that would be helpful?
Yeah, as I was saying, I think that we think there needs to be some jeopardy involved in getting it wrong, and to kind of root out those poor installers. And I think crucially, we need to be verifying performance, so we know that what's going in is actually working, and performance monitoring should be built into retrofit programs from the start. There are sort of quite simple technologies such as heat meters and temperature sensors that show the amount of heat that's being delivered into the home and how the fabric is performing. So inclusion of those in policy can give quite an accurate picture of how the measures are actually working, and allows the industry to sort of mark its homework, so to speak, especially if that data is open to scrutiny, by independent kind of assessors. So I think we've got to kind of open this up a bit really, and make it easier for us to see whether these technologies and insulation measures are actually working and they've been installed properly.
Thank you. So on the kind of heat side, I think obviously the MCS is undergoing some redevelopment around the way that it works with installers, the way that it protects customers. I think one of the really welcome things that they're doing as part of that is expanding their programme where they kind of call everyone that's had a bus-funded heat pump to all MCS accredited heat pumps. So that would include those under the low-income schemes as well. And I think that would address some of the instances where there's kind of was seen under eco where there was kind of multiple subcontracting and just kind of very poor regard for the homeowner in their home. So that's really positive. But I think one thing that it would be really interesting to trial specifically to the point you were making about the kind of monitoring the actual effectiveness and efficiency of the system post-install would be looking at kind of minimum seasonal coefficient of performance for the heat pump system. So currently the bus requirement for the 2.8 minimum SCOP is a product standard metric rather than something that's measured in situ in the home following its install. Obviously, it would be much more expensive to introduce that kind of a monitoring regime. So perhaps it could be trialled and kind of or done on an auditing basis. But I think it would be something really interesting to consider to make sure that people really are getting the best out of these systems.
Okay, thank you. And finally, I want to ask you about longer-term delivery of the Warm Homes plans, because obviously there are funding cycles that come from the government. And I'm wondering what key design and coordination decisions do you think are needed to make sure that the Warm Homes plan translates into effective on-the-ground delivery? Joanne?
Yeah, just briefly, I've mentioned before, but I think proper co-design of delivery systems with installers, local authorities, housing providers to shape real delivery, you're building on that experience of actual delivery. So, proper policy co-development rather than here's what we think, do you agree? Okay. And also place-based delivery can be very effective. So local authorities and regional bodies are really well placed to coordinate delivery across their area. They know they can work out what the demand is. They can then, ensure they've got the skilled jobs in place to meet that demand. And so that whole kind of local and place-based delivery is a really important aspect.
Thank you. And I want to think for a moment about SMEs and specialist contractors and how we ensure that SMEs can access this sort of work, and also so we can broaden the delivery model and get kind of the full range of delivery models. Any comments on how we do that the best? Joanne?
Recognising the importance of the SMEs in this market is crucial. Most retrofit work will actually be delivered by small and medium contractors who are already embedded in the local community. Obviously what they need is that secure long-term pipeline of work. They are unable really to invest in the skills, the equipment, accreditation, etc. that they would need if the policy is constantly shifting. So it's really about that kind of long-term certainty and that there's going to be a business for them.
Thank you.
And well, I think sort of echo that, but also just to stress the local coordination, I think is a key part of this. There are some really good examples of local authority and combined authority bringing SMEs together to support those that are really delivering very good work and delivering good jobs, and using their one-stop shops and things to funnel this through. And I wonder if there's a place for the Warm Homes Agency to sort of do that at a larger scale, or to kind of network those so that we get those benefits across the country.
Thank you. And just finally, I want to talk about what's not in the Warm Homes plan. So we don't have commercial or non-domestic buildings in the Warm Homes plan. It's also been pointed out to me that the government hasn't committed further to the public sector decarbonisation schemes. So firstly, is the exclusion of commercial and non-domestic buildings quite a serious gap in policy? And should the government recommit to the public sector decarbonisation scheme? And what is the impact on the delivery of the Warm Homes plan, sort of with whatever policy choices are made? So
I'd say this is particularly challenging for the heat network sector, which, they're large infrastructure projects. They deliver excellent efficiencies, but that depends on economies of scale and, shared generated heat across a large range of buildings and city centres. Typically, that does require needing a coherent plan for commercial, non-domestic, public sector and residential buildings to be able to make these schemes viable. The end to the public sector decarbonisation fund is particularly challenging because There's no kind of immediate alternative for these kind of institutions to decarbonise. For example, finance is not, always an appropriate option, and so that is really challenging, particularly for the public sector experiencing and really high and volatile energy prices. I'd say that this is a particular challenge for kind of heat network development.
Yeah, I would agree, and the exclusion of commercial buildings from the Warm Homes Plan is a really big missed opportunity to talk about how we decarbonise the whole building stock and the importance of decarbonising the whole building stock. There's around, looking at my notes, 2.1 million non-domestic buildings in the UK consuming very large amounts of fossil fuels, and without a clear pathway and clear policy signals, they could be investing in gas boilers, which then locks them into fossil fuel for the next 15, 10, 20 years, etc. So we really think there needs to be clear regulatory signals for non-domestic buildings around MEES, minimum energy efficiency standard. The industry's waiting for those to be published, ready and waiting, but we haven't had them for years. And support for the SME asset owners as well, so that they can access the finance that they might need to upgrade their home, and the support through, treat them a bit more like households actually, in terms of giving them financial support and retrofit coordination, so that they know what's needed in the home, etc. In the building.
Okay, and just on the public sector decarbonisation, as the government hasn't committed to the next round of that, is that having an impact on business certainty in the same way that we were talking about the pulling off of eco, or is that just being diverted into home decarbonisation instead?
I'd say it is particularly challenging from the kind of heat network developer perspective, because a public sector institution, NHS Trust, represents a huge kind of demand load for that to kind of secure the investor confidence to put the pipes in the ground, and for then the kind of smaller businesses and residents surrounding to benefit from that efficiency. So it is extremely challenging in terms of the kind of viability of those projects.
Okay, so there's a specific impact on heat networks in particular. Okay.
Right, well, thank you very much for your evidence, and if you have additional comments, please write to us. That is the end of our session.